Look what you made us do.
Good evening, viewers. How are we all doing? We have some curry to eat, we've got some debate to watch, we've got some hilarity to ensue. I hope we're all doing well. I am certainly in the highest of spirits because it's been another normal day on normal island with normal British politics, and I have curry. I've got sheikh kebab as well. We've got so much to eat, so much to watch, so much to talk about. It's going to be a good stream. I am looking forward to it. And why wait? Why spend any time dawdling when we could just get right on with the fucking content? We've got people watching, we've got stuff to do, we've got things to see. Let's go. Now, this first debate that we're going to watch, it is a clash between Owen Jones and Michael Walker against Paul Mason. I think it includes like Keir, includes Beergate, includes NATO. For some reason, it should be an absolute laugh riot, and Paul Mason, for the clips that I've seen, is essentially loses his fucking mind. So we're going to enjoy that. We're gonna take a peek at what happens in this debate. Let me just bring this one up. Let me just make sure my levels are all good. Let me make sure that's correct. And we have plenty of curry, which I'm gonna eat. I'm not gonna break any rules. Eat this curry, right? So this curry is gonna be eaten with, again, as the stream says, with full integrity. So without further ado, let's go.
Just search Owen Jones podcast, and then you can listen there wherever you are. And you can use super chat like Peter O'Donovan, whose question I will put to the guests, and I will read you all out at the end. Right, let's bring in Paul Mason and Michael Walker. Hi guys.
How you doing?
Good. How are you both?
Very well. Lovely day outside.
I know. I feel bad that you're. I'm going to a wedding actually in the Shard. It's probably going to destroy. I probably shouldn't have said that. Champagne socialist. Great. Here we go. It's a lovely day, very sunny day, but
it's only a lovely day in southern England. If this was the BBC, we would all get slaughtered now because it's actually raining in the north of England. So all your north of England viewers are saying basically.
I presume it's always raining back home, to be fair. But yeah, I am a traitor to the north. I think we all know that already. Let's start on a point of unity. Let's just back.
So to make it clear, I am now a mukbang streamer. That's what's happened now. I'll upload this clip to YouTube, and I will be glorious in my eating on stream.
Bash the Tories for a little bit.
Faux pas? What faux pas?
Before we talk about other stuff, let's just bring up, I think, an interview which I think summed up so much about where the Conservatives currently are, and why they should be in a bigger mess than they are, frankly. Let's just have a look at this clip, which I think many people have seen from Good Morning Britain.
About a number of our viewers who have got in touch with us about the choices that they're making. Elsie is 77. She's a widow and she's a pensioner who lives in a council house. She receives a pension of £170 a week. Her energy bills have gone, get this, from £17 a month to £85 a month.
Yeah.
She will pay an additional...
I wish my energy bills were £85 a month. Fucking hell.
£816 a year. To cut down on spending, Prime Minister, Elsie has now resorted to eating one meal a day. She's 77 years old. She's losing weight. She goes to the supermarket at the end of the day to buy yellow sticker discounted items.
I'm eating from this trash can all of the time. Sorry, that's a bad
She gets
joke.
up early in the morning to use her Freedom Bus Pass to stay on buses all day to avoid using energy at home. What else should Elsie cut back on, in your
Well, I
opinion?
don't want Elsie to cut back on anything. Let's talk about Elsie and what we're doing. And I just remind you that the 24-hour freedom bus pass was something that I actually introduced. Just parenthetically.
Marvellous. So Elsie should be grateful to you for her bus pass. But what else should
What do you say? Well, it's-
And just speak volumes about the world in which Boris Johnson and all of his fucking Eton, Ponzi, Toff, ilk live in. They live in the real world, right? It's all just. I've always said this before on stream. Let me just swallow this mouthful. It always seemed to me like the Tories are just constantly in campaign mode. It's always just campaign mode, campaign mode. There's never any kind of level of humility that they're ever going to engage in to be able to actually end up, you know, seeing some kind of level of humanity from these people about how their policies will impact people actually in real life, right? In the ways in which they understand the material impact of the policies that they put forward and what happens and things like that. So, when you see them on TV and all it comes down to is just, there's this issue that was happening, what are you going to do to solve this issue? And every single time, Boris Johnson, every member of his cabinet as well, they just come back around and they'll end up saying, well, look at this thing that we did, look how good Brexit is going. Then they'll just ignore the question, they won't answer the actual point that's being raised about, you know, what's happening in the country today. All that always has to come back to some nebulous policy proposal that they've done already. Look how successful we are, because all they want to do is be in campaign mode, right? It's just such, I mean, it just speaks to the fact that, I mean, obviously the Tories are an election-winning juggernaut. They've won more elections, than basically any other political party on the face of the planet. Helps being really old as well, but because it's always just a political game. It's always just a can we stay in power. It's never a let's use our power as the political party to be able to make people's lives better, right?
it's something like the darkest of satires, that isn't it?
I wish I was losing weight. I don't know. Do I look like I've lost weight? Because I definitely haven't.
Really. I mean, presented with a case study of an elderly woman sitting on a bus to keep warm, and the Prime Minister says, well, actually, I introduced that freedom pass to allow her to do that. And he didn't even do that. He lied. Though, to be fair, I don't think he really understands the distinction between truth and lie, so maybe he doesn't know when he's lying. Yeah, Michael, just in terms of that, because I think it's really important, because, you know, we will talk about Beergate because we have to, but cost of living crisis is the defining issue of modern politics. The longest squeeze in living standards since the Napoleonic age, before the current squeeze. That's how about 2 decades of lost growth. We're going to go through 2 decades where people's wages are the same in real terms as they were when the crash happened. It's astonishing. So what do you make of that in terms of Boris Johnson, that response, and what it says about where the Conservatives are politically at the moment?
Well, I think what it means is that whoever is leader of the Labour Party, the next general election, they'll have a decent chance of winning. I wouldn't really write off anyone as Labour leader for potentially beating this Conservative Party in their current form. I mean, I was reading, this is very much an aside, but apparently the Conservative spin doctors are now trying to spin that event as Boris Johnson had food poisoning. So he actually had apparently a secret signal to say if he needed to rush off and puke. So if, you know, potentially we're supposed to be more forgiving of him for that performance than we otherwise would. I suppose it goes without saying that the Conservatives are just, I mean, very proactively, it seems, done nothing to resolve people's issues when it comes to the cost of living crisis. We've got inflation of 8%, benefits are going up by 3%. You've got Boris Johnson saying, oh, we couldn't possibly raise them because that would only further increase inflation. Nonsense. I mean, the inflation is driven by supply side issues. But at the same time, the idea that it is people on benefits, or this 77-year-old woman, Elsie, who should be paying the price of that, you know, in his mind, to keep people's mortgage rate.
That's true. Like, Conservatives believe in this just world fallacy, or at least they pretend to. At least that's what they sell. There's a just world fallacy. Obviously, there's the noble lie involved there too. But I think lots of it's just world fallacy. Is that if poor people are in the position that they're in, they must have got there themselves, right? It's the same thing where you know, the individual personal responsibility. They have no. I say conservatives, a very kind of liberal idea of this idea of everyone has their entire agency, which means that their future is entirely within their own control rather than subject to systemic issues. I mean, obviously that's a very kind of Marxist analysis to say that things are all part of an overall kind of base and superstructure, which you know, liberalism has flatly rejected through, you know, the McCarthyism of neoliberalism, right? Because you see that kind of analysis in Europe, right? On the continent, people will have those, like, some level of systemic analysis. Whereas you look at the US and the UK, and the media sphere, and the kind of conversations that we have, it just never factors in, right? Because even like the conservative parties, most of them, because mostly liberal parties, really, when you look at the continent, even on the post-Soviet states, where you think the anti-communist sentiment would be incredibly high, they never went through like the neoliberal 80s renaissance that we did. So there is at least some kind of level of structural analysis that goes on within, kind of the political discussion, which doesn't fucking happen here.
Rates low. I don't think anyone is particularly buying. And it is why when Boris Johnson I saw him on Friday, I think, when he was talking about the election results, saying the message to us is, obviously a completely boilerplate response, the message to us is we need to get on with the job and focus on the issues that matter to people, the people's priorities. And what are they? I mean, now he's got Brexit done, there is nothing I think the Conservatives are offering that anyone's going to want remotely. There is a cost of living crisis and they're not offering anything, at all. We can talk about whether Labour...
What I did hear, apparently there is a big kind of schism between the Chancellor's office and the Prime Minister's office. And that actually, from what I've heard, is Boris Johnson does want to do more. Obviously, he's less of a neoliberal and more of just a general rightoid populist, right? Obsessed with power rather than obsessed with policy. I think he genuinely wants to actually do something to be able to repair his own personal image. But Rishi Sunak himself is so ideologically, so committed to neoliberalism, as a kind of dogmatic religion almost, just like every kind of Thatcherite of, the past kind of 30 years, 40 years or so. And it's actually the Chancellor's office that are the people who are stopping them from including any additional help for people. Like Sunak's been in interviews saying explicitly it would be silly to give any people any more extra help because he's a monetarist, and he's of the opinion if we inject any more money supply in, that will increase inflation. That's the line that's the compromise that both offices have had to go with to be able to actually have an accord on what policy should be moving forward. All right, Sarah Vane.
Are doing enough, but I think they'll be happy with the fact that they've got this issue of the windfall tax on the energy companies sort of constantly being thrown at the Conservatives. I presume, I'm confident they could do more, but they could hardly do less than the Conservatives are doing right now.
I like the way you basically...
And also the windfall tax, that's just fucking a fly in the ointment, right? Like an incredibly small windfall tax of like a one-off. Explicitly, Richard Reeves has been very clear that it's supposed to be a one-off windfall tax rather than, a higher rate of actual tax or a levy, like an overall levy that they can impose, right? It was like, okay, brilliant. You've had that one-off windfall tax to fund people's energy bills. What's going to happen when we have another recession? When all of the issues with inflation continues going, because inflation's going to get higher. It's projected to be up to 10% by the end of the year, as far as I'm aware, right? So what a one-off windfall tax isn't going to fucking fix that shit.
Essentially just said that Boris Johnson shat himself on national television. Okay, fine. sorry.
That's his spin doctors. It wasn't from me.
Sure. They basically said he shat himself on national television. I'm sorry to be so crude on this lovely sunny Sunday afternoon. Paul, what's your response to that?
Well, I think that the inflation that we've already seen, which is eroding real living standards, is actually only half of what we're going to see by the end of the year. This new Bank of England prediction that we get 10% inflation and then minus 0.25% GDP growth. I mean, that's stagflation. Hopefully, like all inflations, it peaks out because there are some one-offs. It's the spiking energy price because of the Ukraine war, spiking food prices. But those are realistic projections, and we haven't even seen that. Elsie hasn't even seen. I mean, she's gone, from whatever it was, £17 a month to £85 a month. She could be looking at £150 a month, and that is what does that mean? It doesn't mean that just elderly working class women on their own are going to be just panicking, to be honest, about how they're going to get from one month to the next. But you see it all the way up the value chain. The sort of, every one of us who lives in anywhere near a working class area sees young mums, young parents, mainly young mums, trying to, literally hovering at the end of the aisle until the yellow stickers come on at 5 o'clock to get cheap food. Well, it's already a question of heating versus eating for them. And it might get worse. Meanwhile, your 20, 30 somethings who at the moment, that people in work, people who, they're always looking forward to a pay rise. 10% inflation, unless you've got a very, very strong trade union like the RMT on.
Am I looking at a pay rise? Is anybody looking at a pay rise? I've had where's my fucking pay rise, Paul? You told me I was going to get a fucking pay rise.
Steroids that can get you a 10% pay rise. It's a 10% pay cut, one off. And they're going to be looking at the end of the week at, going out. So all sections of society, it's not what they're feeling now, bad though that is, it's what they're
okay, maybe I misunderstood there.
going to be feeling when we hit that double-digit inflation plus recession. And I think that the task of politicians is actually to outline an answer to this. And I mean, Michael mentioned the windfall tax. The windfall tax raises £1 billion, £1.5 billion. It's nothing. the energy security problem for ordinary people and food security as well, just actually eating, is going to be such a huge problem that even Labour's, you know, the obvious red water they put between themselves over, you know, windfall taxes and other measures won't be enough. We're going to have to look at, you know, and this is the problem for both Labour and the Tories. We just need radical fiscal intervention, you know, radical intervention with measures on the supply side, like price caps, like rent caps. Otherwise, I think
Paul is correct, based and true. We do need caps, rent caps specifically, and the government needs to go to Ofgem and say, no, don't do that. Let's not raise the price cap, please, Ofgem. Let's not do that. Because they could just do that. They could just cap energy prices lower than the raised cap that Ofgem are going to be setting. Well, they could just do that if they wanted. They could just do that. I'm skeptical about the idea of price caps on like things like food, considering that it's a supply chain crisis, which price caps probably would make worse. But what we can do is, I think rent caps is especially the place to go with regards to giving people money back on their overall living expenses, as because it's just kind of a no-brainer really. Landlord, what's the landlord's going to do? Just like sell the house on a whim because there's been a rent cap imposed, like a short-term rent cap imposed. I don't think that's going to happen really.
there'll be really major discontent. And I'll just finish and say, well, obviously, we're all obsessed with elections. Yeah, I am. But I'm also interested in discontent. Discontent doesn't just express itself through elections. It expresses itself through riots. It expresses itself through, civil unrest. And I mean, nobody watching this program, I think, I'm trying to think, 10% inflation. You know, I remember when the steelworkers got 20% pay rise in 1980. But does anybody know what 10% inflation feels like? I'm not sure.
So let's talk about Labour, shall we? Because I think we have different perspectives there.
And also, he's also, why are we rioting? Why are we on the street talking about how little the government is doing to deal with the fact that our prices have spiked dramatically and the cost of living is ever higher than it ever used to be, right? Not only, as I mentioned on the previous stream, 18 to 29 groups have less disposable income than boomers at this point in time, than the retired. The people who are supposed to be the biggest consumers in our economy, young people, have less disposable income post-housing than boomers do, right? These are the people, as well as obviously the richer people in society, who are going to be the biggest hit by the issues that are happening. These are supposed to be the most politically motivated people. Why are people not on the streets talking about how little this government has done to help people with the cost of living crisis? What, a loan on energy bills, which was done under the impression that the inflation would end up, tailing off somewhere, which turns out is not going to be the case. Based on current projections, inflation is going to get even worse by the end of the year. So this loan that's going to kick back in when prices are even higher is just delaying the inevitable on the issues that come from the cost of living crisis. And then like a shitty fucking one-off council tax rebate. How is that enough? Why are we not getting out and fucking telling this government with direct action, with civil unrest, that what they're doing isn't fucking good enough? Why not?
Now, we listen to the man, the great man, John Curtis. He is the preeminent pathologist. I really can't say it. Let's have a look. Projected vote share. So again, Labour 35%, Tories 33%. Now, if we again look at the councillors, Labour up 115. So the Tories lost. I mean, the Tories got battered. I think we really can say that. Like minus 491. That's the lower end of what they feared. But Labour were not the principal beneficiaries there at all. And in fact, they didn't do much better than the Greens in terms of how many they gained. Michael, what's your response to what John's analysis was of where Labour, and the point he made was a lower percentage. Labour's vote share was actually slightly lower than 2018. And actually, the point he made about the North was Keir Starmer's thrown everything. That's his political strategy to win those areas back. So they've gone backwards compared to 2018.
I mean, the graph that I saw, which seemed the most worrying.
It's almost like, spoiler alert, people in the North aren't just a bunch of flag-shagging racists, right? That's almost like that's not the case. And people in the North are people who have the same issues, probably more so than people in the South to do with deprivation and living standards, and they're in material conditions. And looking prime ministerial, wearing a suit, being Mr. Rules, being Mr. Dependable, and standing in front of a Union Jack isn't enough to win back votes in the North. And that's why we saw Green gains, we saw Lib Dem gains, people are actually offering them, change and from the from the Greens, sorry, and then at least some progressive policy making from the Lib Dems. So much so that the Labour were running attack ads against them. It's almost like Keith doesn't fucking understand people outside of his little Westminster bubble.
For Labour was showing how vote share had changed in different regions of the UK. It was only in London that it increased, and everywhere else it had fallen since 2018. And I mean, I agree with John. That's what we should be comparing this to. I've heard people sort of say, "Oh, well, you can't." 2018, Labour had the red wall, so it doesn't matter if he's going back a little bit there because that means he could still win back some of those seats. Well, saying we still had the red wall in 2018, I mean, I'm not sure that's particularly credible. It was in between an election where we held on to it by a thread and an election where we lost it incredibly dramatically. So I don't think you can say, oh, if we're performing like we did in 2018, that means we can win back those seats. I don't think anyone can be confident about that. Do these elections mean that Labour can't possibly become the largest party at the next general election? Absolutely not. I mean, I think that's perfectly plausible, perfectly possible. I suppose I was trying to think today, what would be, if you're a real Keir Starmer stan, what would be your positive spin on this? And I've got it, which is that you could say the problem with Jeremy Corbyn was that he scared people. The problem with Keir Starmer is he doesn't excite anyone. So you could say that you might expect Keir Starmer to do better in a general election than a local election because there are less people, he can't infuse anyone during a low stakes election, but maybe he won't send people out to vote against him in a high stakes election. So potentially they could sort of say he's well placed to do better in a general than Jeremy Corbyn, but it's not a high. It's not looking good for someone who has rested their whole identity as Labour leader on I am someone who can win. Like I've seen today sort of tweets saying, Keir Starmer said, well, we shouldn't talk about Beergate. We should talk about the real issues that are facing the country right now, and we should talk about my big ideas.
Mhm.
What are your big ideas? What are the real issues facing the country? So if all you can say is say, I'm electable and I'm an upstanding citizen, if your election results aren't particularly good, and now you're being investigated by the police, you're going to need something else to run on.
We'll come on to that because it's a really critical point. Paul, I mean, I just want to put to you that the expectations management by the Labour leadership was an exercise in epic gaslighting because the whole thing was 2018's results were so good. Who's Labour leader at the time? Oh, it's Jeremy Corbyn. That because of Long Corbyn, that we'll struggle to do as well as we did under Jeremy Corbyn because of Long Corbyn. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It's completely inconsistent. And what it does show, do you not think?
It's a paradox. It doesn't make any. Yeah. Owen's right. It doesn't make any sense. If Corbyn did well, it's not because of Corbyn. But if Corbyn does badly, then it means that it's going to affect every single election for the rest of eternity until the shackles of Long Corbyn have been lost eventually in 2032 or something.
Thing. Their whole shtick, the revisionism of Labour history, 2017 was just a blip. It was an aberration. Theresa May fucked it, and that's why Labour did well. And actually, 2018 showed they sustained that, didn't they? It wasn't a blip. So, do you not accept it's epic gaslighting, the Labour leadership's expectation management?
I mean, I tend to just ignore expectation management anyway. I mean, I think part of it is true. That is the part of it that is true is that it is, it was a high point, and they needed to go beyond it. The whole Long Corbyn thing is I think, well, part of that is true, but it's not the reason why they're not going. That's not the reason why they're not going forward. I'll come to why I think it is. I think I do take issue with John Curtin. I mean, psephology is, as he said, it's the study of pebbles. It's the study of literally how many stones were thrown on this side and on the other. There are other ways of understanding electoral dynamics. One of them is MRP polling, which I'm a bigger fan of. And MRP polling, that is, you look at the demographics of certain areas and you dig into them. No, I haven't done it. I don't do it. But in a kind of intuitive way, I'm just looking at a couple of places. Lee, where I come from, Labour was...
Yeah, and it was seats within the north as well, specifically. The ones that Corbyn won were in the north. The one that Starmer lost were in the north. Labour went down on seats in the north. Their council gains were mostly in London, right? Where in a general election, London almost certainly always goes all red regardless anyway. And if they were trying to break the shackles of being the party of the metropolitan liberal elite, which obviously is a garbage phrase, I've gone over countless times how it's a garbage phrase. I'm not going to go over it just now, but there's plenty of VODs that I've got about how the idea of the metropolitan liberal elite is just completely fucking bunk regardless. But if there was ever a time in which Labour were specifically the party of the metropolitan liberal elite, it'd be now. It'd be now that they're losing seats in ex manufacturing towns in the north, and they're gaining seats in wealthy London boroughs like fucking Westminster and Wandsworth. I mean, every party's been taking the north for granted for decades, but yeah, correct point. One equation. Yeah, and in London, yeah, they did loose counts, including Tower Hamlets. A fucking lol. Incredibly amusing. But the overall seat gains were in London regardless anyway. But the fact that they can lose up north and then win down south is just the opposite of what we were told was the main aims of the whole Starmer fucking project. All that neoliberal posturing about drugs bad, can't do any nationalisation. Turns out Northerners just don't care about that shit. They don't want to hear.
Winning wards that were quite Brexity. In Lee, a lot of the Brexity wards are where miners used to live, and they were winning, and also where they weren't winning, they were quite close. That's one thing. Nuneaton, where they went backwards, again, there's really interesting little microcosm in Nuneaton. Lots of places where the difference, where if you had the Labour and the Green vote, Labour would either just have won or just have lost. So for me, I take the positives that there is a direction of travel, even within parts of the Red Wall. The problem is Red Wall isn't it's not a homogeneous.
Yeah, look, they lost Tower Hamlets Council and the mayoralty as well to Aspire and Lutfer Rahman after he got investigated for some criminal activity. You can even, I mean, it's just it's the icing on the cake. It really is.
Thing. If you look at places like Mansfield, places like Amber Valley, there is a cultural difference. Like Radcliffe, I was told that Labour pulled its campaigning teams from Radcliffe, which is an area in Bury. And those who know it, and know and love it, it's like got a hegemonic Gramscian party called Radcliffe Independence. And they scooped the pool. They won everything, and that's because they're not primarily Brexity, but it's a bit Brexity that party. Now, what we can say, the huge positives are the London councils, and again, as someone who's interested in.
It's not a good positive though. It's not like what we want. It's not what we want to see, Paul. I have to search out Radcliffe Independence though, because I used to live around the corner from Radcliffe. I've forgotten the place. Whitefield. That's the name. I used to live in Whitefield, literally just down the road from Radcliffe. So I know the area. And I'm not surprised they voted for an independent candidate, because Radcliffe is a very rundown area. It's been just ignored by Westminster for generations. Again, ex-manufacturing town in the northwest suburbia, right? Or northwest market or manufacturing, right? It's a damning indictment of the current kind of Labour Party platform. That these seats just can't be. They just can't win them. They just can't win them.
In the dynamics of class struggle rather than elections, I see those London council results as part of the continuing radicalisation, not just of London, but of the urban proletariat. Seeing Bristol, Worthing, everywhere where there is sort of university-educated people and a salariat, Labour is really doing well. So I still agree that they're nowhere near being able to form a majority government. But as Curtis said, that might not be what the next election is about.
Let's talk about Beergate. Now, I have to say, I was one of those people who basically dismissed.
The point is that he's trying to talk about the London proletariat, which is true. There are huge areas in London in which people get wrongly cast as being some kind of elitist, when really they're just the same working people as up north. Just they have to pay more for housing. They earn more, their wages are higher, but their expenses are higher because London is more expensive. So the difference doesn't really make that many odds, right? But in those places, like in Tower Hamlets, Labour lost. They lost in poorer areas. Like Tower Hamlets is the fourth most deprived place in district in London. Yet they're winning in places like Wandsworth, Barnet, and Westminster, right? So if you're going to try and make this point, Paul, that you're winning the London proletariat, then why are you losing the poorer areas and winning the rich areas? It makes no fucking sense. It is just a garbled cope. He's coping and seething about the fact that his bomb boy Starmer doesn't actually have the political nous that he thinks he does.
Out of hand. There was a right-wing desperate attempt to deflect from Partygate, which obviously engulfed the government with pretty politically disastrous consequences. And I feel like an idiot now, to be honest. And I think this is actually quite revealing, partly because actually Labour bet the house on this, because Labour's whole shtick under Starmer was, we're going to be, the dividing lines are integrity, honesty, it's a test of character almost, rather than having transformative policies to deal with the cost of living crisis. Now, let's just explain. Let's just quickly go through why I'm an idiot, basically. Let's just listen. Let's just see what the latest Keir Starmer interview is doing this.
As I've explained a number of times, I was working in the office. We stopped for something to eat. There was no party. There was no breach of the rules. I'm confident about that. police have obviously got to do their job. But meanwhile, I'm here in Scotland because we've had a fantastic set of results, the best results for 10 years, coming second in Scotland. There's a smile on all of our faces, and we've taken this council. So Labour is very clearly back on the pitch, and we're turning the corner, and now we're marching towards that general election.
The tennis pitch, maybe?
Yeah. Oh, dear me. So basically, the reason I feel like a complete idiot, I thought we had the ops note, but the basic an ops note has been published, which shows very clearly that this was a pre-planned dinner, which was planned for 1 hour 20 minutes. A staffer is briefing. I know
And you're absolutely right, Charlie, as well, in that you saw people on Twitter like celebrating, going, "Oh, look, Nick Bowles is voting for Labour for the first time since 1997. Like, let's go run as a Conservative MP and a Conservative councillor." If you're attracting people like Nick Bowles and Christian Wakeford to your party, then you're not a fucking Labour Party anymore. I'm sorry. Like, it's incredibly frustrating watching people treat politics like a game of football, which is red team versus blue team, and they want the red team to win because they're the red team, rather than because they offer some kind of level of material change to the lives of people in the country. It's embarrassing. And these people, I was saying on the stream yesterday, these people call themselves the adults in the room, for Christ's sake.
people be like, "Oh, they're briefing the right-wing media." Fine, I'm fine for people to say that, to be honest with you. But nonetheless, the staffer is briefing that no work was done afterwards. Now, what Keir Starmer, the reason I defended him is in interviews, he kept saying that, "Oh, we were working and then we stopped very briefly to have some food and carried on." Now, what Joe Morn, the lawyer, we've interviewed him on the show several times. First, whether or not you think the investigation is politically motivated, I think there were proper questions which arise for Starmer's team. And it seems, he says, plainly right, Durham Police should investigate them. That they should, he says, investigate Cummings, but two wrongs don't make a right. And he said he really wouldn't want to be placing a bet that Starmer hasn't broken the law.
Also worth pointing out that this debate, this conversation here, is being had before the events of today. Right, this was a couple of days ago, 2 days ago, yesterday. I forget. It might have been yesterday. So at this point, there was no generalized understanding, and the announcement had been made. Sorry, that Keir was going to resign if he was given a fixed penalty notice. Now that the case is being reopened, which amusingly is what I said on stream yesterday. I literally said, I posted a TikTok about it this afternoon. I was literally saying, look, well, he's kind of backed himself into a corner now. Probably his best course of action is to say, look, let's leave it up to the police. If they give me a penalty notice, I'll resign, and if they don't, then I'm clear, right?
So he thinks it's entirely possible that he's broken the law. Why is this important? Well, I mean, Rishi Sunak, let's be honest, Rishi Sunak's political career was destroyed by turning up to a meeting early to have, and he didn't know there was going to be a birthday and having some birthday cake. If we're going to be honest, that's what happened. But you see, Labour went for him on that.
I mean, didn't his political career more get destroyed by, like, all of the dodgy dealings with Ekshata Murthy and the shell company that she had that took money from the government for PPE?
Viciously and aggressively, and succeeded in scalping him. Now, if you've got the Labour leadership who went so hard on this, and it's clear that they had, when they were campaigning, they had a social event indoors, not with people in their own bubble, which is what the law allowed for at the time, and they didn't work, which is what staffers are briefing the newspapers. Well, he's cocked, isn't he?
Owen, it's one staffer, and you're wrong. The operation.
I do think, right? So we're gonna have to have a comment, like, talk a long time really about the difference between what is legal and what we believe is justified, justified bending of the rules, right? And you know me, I fucking despise Keith Starmer. I hate that man so much. But I genuinely think, looking at what happened, right, there is some grounds that we can time he's out campaigning in an area that he doesn't even fucking live. So there is at least, whether some kind of legal justification is kind of up in the air. Again, you'd have to have all the evidence, understand it. We've only seen like a couple of clips and a little snippet of their timetable, of their itinerary, right? So we can't make like an entirely substantiated point about whether or not we understand the legality of what happened. Second of all, even if it was illegal, I don't think much harm was actually done by him having a meal when he's out campaigning. I'm not sure I really care, considering that's his job, is to go out campaigning. My issue is the lies. It's the lies about, trying to sweep it under the rug. It's the lies about Angela Rayner. It's the lies about, all the way up until now. Why this is a bigger story for the press than his continual breaking of his leadership pledges, right? But even so, obviously we can't trust the man who explicitly went on record as saying, I'm willing to break promises, I'm willing to just lie to people to get my own way. That is what people are going to remember out of this. So that's why I think that he was correct, obviously from his own perspective, to do the kind of the gamble that he's done here, is because, you know, if he does get off scot-free, the whole furore that happens because of the gamble that he's taken overshadows the fact that he was dishonest, right? And I do think that he was correct in I will watch a speech of his later on the stream when he said, you know, I isolated 6 times over the course of COVID. He followed the rules to the letter quite a lot of the time. They cancelled loads of different events when rules changed. That's true. Like, I would always want to take as many opportunities as I could to be able to smear Keith Starmer because I fucking despise the man. But I'm only going to do it when I actually fully believe the things that I'm saying, right? I do think there is some level of cynicism, though, where he's deliberately saying this, making this kind of really Boolean statement about what he will or won't do right now, this gamble, to put pressure on Durham police not to issue a fixed penalty notice. Because would be taking a political action to do so, whether they weren't previously. So I think there's a lot of people saying that they don't think it will absolve him, and I think they're incorrect. Like Ash Sarkar was saying this. I fully disagree with Ash on this one. I think that it's the correct move for him to do, and I do think it will absolve him, somewhat in the eyes of the general public, which is a shame. But you know, we shall see what happens. It's out of both his and our hands now. It's all in the hands of the Durham Constabulary.
Operations note proves that it was a work event. It was because work.
Why is it previous work event if they're having it? What, it allowed for social events with people outside of the?
No, it says nothing to do with a social event. Mary Foy was there as part of the event. One, and two, that work stops at the end of the day after the dinner. That would, to me, prove that number one, that it was a work event, and I think that's the reason that, you know, whatever. Yes, the Tories have managed to knock Labour off the news cycle that they want, the agenda they wanted. Yes, it's given some ammunition to the right wing press, and it is, of course, a right wing.
Paul, this is what the Tories. You're literally regurgitating what the Tories said about their events. You're saying the same thing they did.
I don't care, because the point is, Keir hasn't broken the law.
How do you know that? Why does Jolyon Maugham think they might have broken the law and he's a lawyer and you don't?
Jolyon Maugham's Twitter thing starts with the thing, I don't know much about this, okay?
No, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. He said he had...
Let's not have an argument about him. Let's have an argument about Keir. Keir, it's quite clear that they didn't break the law because it was a work event. Number one. This source, Briefing the Times, very interesting, isn't it? One source doesn't brief that Keir broke the law at all. This source has a grudge against Mary Foy. Okay, and for people in the Labour movement, that might give you you don't want to jigsaw identify.
But I don't think we're going to do a character assassination now on someone.
No, I'm going to do a character assassination of a source who's not been revealed.
Well, I know. Well, I think exactly. So we can't. We don't know who he is, so we can't do that.
But the Times said that.
Turns out it's the son of James Delingpole. I go from fucking Breitbart. Now, it is the sweetest of irony, right? It's the sweetest of irony that after years and years of being gaslit by the Labour right about, oh no, it's not a media ploy to be able to undermine Jeremy Corbyn, he's just really bad. But then, it didn't matter about talking about the Chairman Mao bicycle, the photoshopped hat, him being Voldemort, him being an absolute boy, talking about his jacket, or the depth of his bow, or his dirty campaign to give people to feed fucking children, right? All of these media hit pieces saying that Dan Hodges in the Mail saying that Labour have to kill him, right? After all of that media hubbub around Jeremy Corbyn, right, and them gaslighting us, trying to tell us that there is no concerted media campaign to oust Jeremy Corbyn for being too left-wing, from a bunch of people who call themselves leftoids, who should understand cultural hegemony, right, and how that affects the way in which press end up reporting, all of manufactured consent, all of that kind of stuff. They spent so long telling us that, and now Keir Starmer is under the smallest of pressure. Nothing even first of all, the actual issue is far more legitimate than anything to do with the Chairman Mao style bicycle, or the bow, or the choice of jacket, or the choice of tie, or whatever fucking media circus nonsense got drummed into us about Jeremy Corbyn, right? It doesn't even. It's far further to being a real issue than any of those things. At the slightest bit of media pushback that the right wing of the Labour Party were happy to play into to smear Jeremy Corbyn when they're trying to sabotage the election, right? And now they're suddenly going, oh, I can't believe the media out here trying to smear, trying to undermine Keir Starmer. I'm like, fucking, your fault, mate. You've made your bed. It's all your chickens coming home to roost. It's a fucking roostathon round here, right? It's incredible how the liberal media, the liberal commentariat, just feel like that they're untouchable. They feel like that they are, again, it's the adults in the room thing again. And they thought they could make a deal with the tabloid media, with Keir Starmer writing in The Sun. They thought they could make a deal. We'll go, well, if we'll use the power of the right media to oust Corbyn because we dislike him, right? We'll use that, we'll harness that power. And then you'll be nice to Keir Starmer afterwards, won't you? Pretty please. And then they fucking destroy him afterwards, right? Not even destroy him. One story about Keir Starmer having a curry and a beer, and it fucking brings down his whole premiership, right? It's pathetic. And also the sweetest irony.
The Mail, the Times reported that the Mail was being held by people or a person who was from the left and didn't like Starmer. Fine. Well, the police will take that into account. I think Starmer will come out of this with increased moral authority. He'll be proved innocent.
And the incredible, like the hypercopium that they're engaging in by saying that, oh, it was a Trotskyist plot with Durham Constabulary to undermine Keith. I'm just like, this actual derangement. Obviously, all of the trots do want Keir Starmer gone, but it was James Delingpole's son, rather, who did who filmed the video. The idea they think that it was just some kind of secret plot where they were in league with the right wing and in league with the police. It's just fantasy island. It's cope. It's just like Giga Cope from the Labour rightoids. It really is.
And so that's my prediction.
Maybe he will.
So,
Michael,
so why would we, the left, join in some kind of Tory-initiated right-wing pylon that's only there to distract from the issue of cost of living and all the other fuck-ups that they're doing?
Michael, are we essentially being Tory stooges by indulging this? And do you think Keir Starmer has been honest?
Oh, I mean, I think it depends what you do. So I was thinking about the difference between sort of what some on the left are doing now vis-a-vis Starmer and what some on the right did vis-a-vis Jeremy Corbyn. And I do think, if I were to get a spot on Question Time this week or whatever, I wouldn't have a question thrown at me about whether Keir Starmer would be a good prime minister when it comes to the economy and say, no, this guy's dishonest because he potentially lied about some curry he had in Durham once. And that was the kind of thing that the right were doing to Jeremy Corbyn. There was different issues of the day, and they were booking their 8 p.m. their 8 a.m. slot on the Today programme to trash him and say the real issue here is anti-Semitism, blah, 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 blah. If there was anyone on the left who was doing that, it was sort of like hogging the camera to make every sort of potential good news story for Labour one about Keir Starmer having a curry and a beer in Durham in 2021. I do think that would be a problem, and I do think you could very reasonably say you're doing the Tories' job for them in the same way that Margaret Hodge was doing the Tories' job for them back in 2019. I think it's a very different story when you've got people who are essentially just doing commentary on Twitter and are refusing to fall in line with and do Starmer's job for him, essentially. Because for me, the issue here is I'm not a lawyer, right? I don't know if the law was broken. My understanding is the question isn't just was it a work event, it's was it an event which was reasonably necessary for work. And so the argument which Jolyon Moore is putting forward, and he's a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, he's saying all the facts that I can see in front of me, it looks like this is probably not reasonably necessary for work. There are other, QCs. I've seen Adam Wagner do a thread where he's saying, no, potentially this was reasonably necessary for work. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I haven't pored over the regulations. But I think what seems to me to be the case is that there's a high chance, a non-negligible chance that Keir Starmer gets a fine from this. And I do think if he gets a fine from this, he's going to have to resign. And that's not
David
because
Powell this. Yeah. Do you think
that's not because what he's done is morally equivalent to Boris Johnson? I think we should be absolutely clear. Boris Johnson's fine was an indication that he'd taken part in a pattern of behaviour which was deeply offensive to anyone who'd suffered during COVID-19. Keir Starmer hasn't done that. But what Keir Starmer has done is stood up and said, because Boris Johnson is being investigated by the police, he should resign. Now, the defence there is, he was talking within a context of Boris Johnson having broken all of these laws and it being horrendous. Fair enough. I think, it's awkward for him, but I think you can plausibly make that case. The Rishi Sunak thing one, I don't, because Rishi Sunak did just turn up to a meeting a bit early. There was a birthday cake, right? It wasn't particularly offensive to the victims of COVID-19, but he got fined, and Keir Starmer said that's enough that you should resign. If Keir Starmer now gets fined in an event which I agree I don't find particularly offensive, I don't think that was an FU to the victims of COVID. But if he gets fined and he's called for Rishi Sunak to resign over exactly the same thing, I don't see how he can maintain his position as leader of the Labour Party without becoming a national object of ridicule.
I mean, that's true, isn't it, Paul? David Barrett says if he doesn't resign, what damage will his hypocrisy do to the party?
I think, like I say, I don't think he's going to be found guilty. And one, I don't think he's going to be found in breach of the law. Two, the Durham police do not issue retrospective fines, because if they did, they'd have to fine Dominic Cummings as well. So again, if it were me, here's what I say: I'm a class fighter. I see this as a complete setup job by the right wing media to distract from the fact that that Labour is actually advancing, that the Tories are in trouble. And so if it were me,
I mean, to his credit, Paul's correct here. Obviously, any kind of like tabloid politics, it's kind of turning into like a celebrity game show, essentially, like celebrity politics game show, right? Like paparazzi politics, where all we're talking about is, do people have curry, do people have cake, right? It's clear, he's correct that it is, it's deliberately there to distract people from the real issues, right? He's correct in saying so. It's just, funny how the Liberal commentariat weren't saying that during, Jeremy Corbyn's tenure.
one option would be to say, yes, of course, we did call for all these people to resign. If the Durham police have been bounced into a investigation by a bunch of false information and then found me guilty, and then revived, making me the only person that they've ever retrospectively fined, I see that as a political attack, as political policing, and I would fight back. No, I don't think it's. I don't think
That's
it's
exactly the same as the Metropolitan Police and Rishi Sunak, though. No, I mean they weren't going. They initially said we're not going to do a retrospective investigation.
But Labour is not responsible for the Metropolitan Police. It's not responsible for the timing or the decision when they decided to.
They backed it. They said this is a great thing and they should resign because the investigation is open. So
Was it Paul? Paul, just
Remember,
quickly, the Tories suggested that the Metropolitan Police had been bounced into doing their investigation by political pressure. That's what.
Hold on a minute. The Sue Gray report, which originated as the Cabinet Secretary's report, i.e. the investigation, was already underway. So the point is that there was a pattern of proven law breaking, unproven, self-admitted, Allegra Stratton, one. Two, there's an investigation going on into it. And in many ways, the Met intervention puts the stymie on that investigation. I still think that investigation would be what finishes Johnson. Three, Johnson then lied to Parliament, which is something that Starmer hasn't done. And so what we must be really careful about is not erecting moral equivalencies between these things when he hasn't even been found guilty and can't be fined and without a major act of political policing.
Let's move on from that. In a sense, Big 8 for me, I'm not that personally invested, as I've already said. And I think the point that you make about lying, I think this is really important. And I think we need to get to this point. And it's not a discussion that the media has had for very fascinating reasons. Boris Johnson is an epic liar. I mean, lying is woven into the very fabric of his being. His whole political career is based on deceit. And as I said, I don't think he knows the difference between truth or lies himself, though I'll spare everyone the cod psychology. But that doesn't mean Keir Starmer isn't himself a fundamentally dishonest politician, because he is, isn't he?
True.
His whole leadership campaign, and I think we need to talk about this because I think it's about where Labour goes from here, is the most dishonest leadership campaign in the history of British democracy. No leader has ever stood for leadership of their party and won, and marched so dramatically in the opposite direction. Tony Blair didn't say he was...
And not just changing his policy prescriptions, which is bad enough, right? Changing the understanding of the unity platform and the platform he's going to put to the public as Labour leader, right? It's not just that. Because I think some people would probably be able... I think probably a huge push of people would be able to at least let some of that go. But then to use his power in the party to essentially try and expel anybody who doesn't like literally, engaging in Stalinist purges of the party in membership, at least not from reality, right? He's not Minecrafting anybody, but to so cynically want to run for leader to then use his power to excise anybody who disagrees with him. That's the worst part by a country mile, right? It's horrendous. It's completely horrendous. And quite frankly, retrospectively looking back, really Jeremy Corbyn's attempts to win people over when they were trying to undermine their own party from the fucking inside fell on completely deaf ears. And if there is some secret Trotskyist plan to work with Durham police to expunge Starmer, then he only has himself to blame. I'm sorry, but it's true.
He was going to revise Clause 4 when he stood for leader, but he damn well made clear which direction his leadership was going to go in. Now, what Starmer did is he said he was going to be basically Corbynism without Corbyn. And what he's offering now is Blairism without Blair and indeed the charisma. And I'm just interested in this, Paul, because I'm not saying it's to have a go, because I just think this is where we go from here. Just in terms of what you said at the time, because I think this is a discussion we never had. And I John Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my views. What do you do, sir? And I've had to be held account for things I've got very wrong, as everyone knows. This is what you said in the leadership campaign, and I want to see if you've changed your opinion. Okay, so you said if you don't think
Owen Jones takes a long time to ask the questions that he wants to ask.
Keir Starmer would advance the class struggle, you're possibly not understanding social democracy correctly from a Marxist perspective. He said that Keir is firmly on the left, albeit a different left than the Corbyn-McDonald tradition. I think we can all agree on that. He will stick by the economic radicalism of 2015 to 2019. Above all, Green New Deal, rejecting austerity and fighting for a new economic model. And you also, oh, that's the same one. But you said very clearly at the time that he was and you said, sorry, the other tweet that I don't have is that he was not going to purge the left. Yeah. Now, in the Sunday Times last week, Keir Starmer hints expulsion for Labour's NATO skeptic MPs. And that is within Keir Starmer's office, his advisors, who are all a bunch of Blairites now, because all the lefties that they kept for the leadership campaign in order to dupe people on the left into voting Keir Starmer, they're gone. They've been basically let lost.
Yeah, like Rebecca Long Bailey tweeted out retweeted somebody else's tweet with a link to an article that had a sentence that was critical of Israel or something, right? That was enough for him to use as an excuse to excise Rebecca Long Bailey from his cabinet. It's almost like he was looking for excuses. He was looking for specific reasons with which to be able to purge people outside of his ideological bubble, right? Despite the fact that at the start of Corbyn's tenure, he was happy to surround himself with people within the cabinet who he had firm disagreements with, didn't expel them when they expressed disagreement, and then they used that as a deliberately so that they could resign en masse to undermine his premiership.
Lost by attrition. He is intellectually, apparently, sold on kicking out 11 left-wing MPs. And I predicted last year, with you both here, that they would do this, because that they would end up saying, we'll end up relying on these left-wing MPs in a hung parliament, and they don't.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Dalek. It's gonna be a fun one watching him just like intellectually die on camera. It's gonna be incredibly funny. But and you know, he has been proved incorrect. There is no change in economic model that is being proposed by Keir Starmer. It's very clear from both him and Reeves that they are running on a monetarist platform rather than a Keynesian one. Because again, as I said yesterday, this is the fight for the soul of British politics. Is breaking the hegemony of monetarist fiscal policy that has gripped the nation for decades and decades and decades. Right? That's what we're fighting for. And Keir Starmer has already waved the white flag on that one. He's already given up. So clear Paul already has been proved wrong, not just on the understanding of whether or not the left would be purged, but also on the understanding that there would be an alternative economic model proposed to what's been offered by the Conservatives for however many years.
They don't want to do that, so they'll kick them out, and they're already talking about doing that. Isn't it just the case, Paul? You got this one wrong. Keir Starmer, whatever is going on in his head, his project is a new Labour revanchist project. It's the hard right of the Labour Party, and they want the left permanently buried and exiled. And their economic programme, such as it is a tinkering around the edges, which is why they went on hard on Partygate, because they don't have any transformative policies.
So that's a long list of things. I think the first thing is to come back to your original point. Is he a fundamentally dishonest politician? No, I don't think so. I think he's...
What? Absolute fucking nonsense. Not only has he been proven to be dishonest about Beergate already, but we've already seen from what Owen's put forward at the start of this that he clearly already has been dishonest about the understanding about the kind of platform that he would be championing as Labour leader. Simple.
He's true to his values. I know what his values are.
His values are power. His values are having power and keeping power.
I described them at the time in all the stuff that I've written. They're basically left Rawlsian liberalism. He is a Rawlsian liberal in the sense that he believes in social justice and the state as a way to deliver it. That's basically what it is. Now, let's come to bit by bit through this. Okay, so
if he's a liberal, join the fucking Lib Dems. They're the one with lib in the name. They're the Liberal Party. If you're a Rawlsian liberal, fuck off and join the Lib Dems. I'm sorry. That's not what the Labour Party is for. The Labour Party is for, as per the Constitution, workers' control of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. It's right there in Clause 4.
So what did I get wrong? Did I get things wrong? First of all, that Marxism from a Marxist viewpoint was a wind-up to this. I don't want to use pejorative terms about people, but someone who is not in touch with reality, called Joshua Y. Jackson. And if you look at it, it's a reply. Right? It's not a tweet saying it's a reply to this guy's mania. And I think no, it is for. Let's take the things he's done. I'm not going to defend everything about what he's done, but one thing that he and Rachel Reeves, who's more to the right of Labour than he is, have done is deliver a Green New Deal style fiscal offer, the 28 billion a year. That's a big thing, and it was something that was fought for inside Labour. And I think it gives us on the left a shell of money which we can fill with radical proposals. That's one thing. The purging of the left. Let's move to that. Okay, what did he do wrong? First of all, he took a series of stupid and needless whipping decisions that forced people like Nadia Whittome and Olivia Blake.
I am frustrated that Owen has formatted this so that Paul Mason is in the middle rather than on the right. Because if it was Owen followed by Michael followed by Paul, I could do the Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard meme because it works so well. They aren't just the Pokemon evolutions.
Blake and all the rest of them out of the shadow, out of their front bench roles, their PPS roles, and some shadow cabinet ministers. And then number two, I think the way he handled the Rebecca Long Bailey thing was
I cut them off there. Let me go back and listen to Paul's second point again. Then
a shell of money which we can fill with radical proposals. That's one thing. The purging of the left. Let's move to that. Okay, what did he do wrong? First of all, he took a series of stupid and needless whipping decisions that forced people like Nadia Whittome and Olivia Blake and all the rest of them out of the shadow, out of their front bench roles, their PPS roles, and some shadow cabinet ministers. And then number two, I think the way he handled the Rebecca Long Bailey thing was needless and another example of trying to push Corbynites out. That's another thing. So I disagree fundamentally with the way he has handled the left. As to whether it's Keir who's pushing for those 11 MPs to go, I'd say probably not. I think not.
You said he was definitely not going to purge the left, Paul, in the leadership.
Wait a minute. On the specifics, it's more people to the right of him, the people who are pushing for the 11. Remember that those 11, I think, got duped into signing an absolutely disgraceful petition that I've heard other left MPs say will probably end their careers full stop. Because how can you trust them if you are an anti-NATO, pro-Putin leftist? How could you ever trust them ever?
Yes, that's a nice straw man you've built there. That if you're anti-NATO, then you must be pro-Putin. Okay, the guy who calls himself a Marxist, right? Shilling are here for NATO. Heaven forbid.
Again, but I don't want them. I want them to be in. I want them to stop signing stop the war petitions and become a far more vibrant left. Number one, I think the left has walked into a bunch of purges. To be honest, when we talk about purging the left, people who it's almost as if they stand up and sort of arms spread, shout, "Shoot me now," by tweeting stuff that they know is going to get them expelled. I think that's for them to decide. In the end, I think there is too much discipline. There is too much use of disciplinaries. I'm certainly against the prescription of workers' liberty. I'm certainly against the prescriptions of some of the other groups. And yeah, we are at war for democracy.
So yeah, he's explicitly saying here that he disagrees with the purges. That like prescriptions, it's just purges, right? At the end of the day. And he's disagreed with the removal of people like Rebecca Long Bailey and Nadia Whittome, right? So he's already ceding the point here. So again, any quibbles that he's got is just cope, right? It's just cope at the end of the day. You've already conceded, mate.
But remember, it's not just Keir. There's a right wing to the right of him that's lining up to get rid of him. And I think, like some of the people on the left today, they would be highly delighted if he had to resign as a result of Beergate because they're lining up and raising funds already.
So, Michael, we're going to run out of time. So, Michael,
No,
it's fine. It's not. I asked a very long-winded question. Michael, in terms of just the honesty of Keir Starmer, because I mean, the argument I would say is, it's the media. I would say let him get off the hook for the most, as I said, dishonest leadership campaign in the history of British democracy. People can find a more dishonest leadership campaign. I'd love to hear it. But and because those on the receiving end were the left, and we're not legitimate political actors. You can do what you want to the left. That's fine. That's how British politics works.
True, very true. Right, and that's again. Look at the Liberal commentators who do the same thing. Liberal commentators doing exactly the same thing with regards to Beergate and regards to the media portrayals of the respective Labour leaders. All the Liberal commentariat thought that the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn about the bow and the coat and the bicycle, these were all fair game, right? They were just fair games, and these were issues with things that Corbyn said had done. He's put himself into some sort of invidious position. But suddenly it's this liberal, centrist, sacred cows are under the media spotlight. Suddenly it's, oh, you can't attack him like this. He's not the valid target is only supposed to be the leftoids. It's rank hypocrisy from the worst people amongst our media class. All these fucking Oxford-educated pricks. Obviously, I understand Owen is as well, but we can't all be perfect, right? All these Oxford-educated people who see themselves as untouchable, who see their opinions as being above criticism, because for decades and decades and decades they never were ever criticised until the advent of the online water cooler and social media and the ways in which the liberal commentary are now held to account. Suddenly, now that their centrist sacred cows are under the microscope, suddenly it's the death of democracy, right? It is unfucking believable.
But now they're trying to deal over on potentially a much, much smaller dishonesty, aren't they? So what's your just response to what Paul said and about the honesty of Keir Starmer?
I mean, I suppose we can talk about honesty. I mean, I think his honesty speaks for itself. He will say one thing one day and say another thing the other. I agree with what you've said, that the media don't care about the leadership election being a scam because they don't see that the left as legitimate political actors. Potentially now, because he's made truthfulness and integrity sort of the only thing he stands for, it would be a pretty ridiculous reason to have to resign as leader of the Labour Party for having a curry and a beer. But I wouldn't shed a tear for him. I suppose the thing I want to push back on, just because I feel like it's an important thing to say given who's going to be watching this show, is I do think it's pretty not cool, essentially, to say that the people who've been expelled from the Labour Party basically waved a flag and said, please expel me. Now, I don't know all of the cases. I'm sure we could go through all of the various ones, and there are different things we could disagree about. But the one that sort of stands out to me most is Pamela Fitzpatrick. She was sort of like a very impressive campaigner for welfare rights. I remember going campaigning for her with my mum, who also works in welfare rights. She was like,
I campaigned for
brilliant.
Well, yeah.
She started I think it's the Harrow Law Centre, stood to be General Secretary of the Labour Party. Exactly the kind of person who you want to be sitting on the Labour benches. She gets expelled for having a meeting once with Socialist Action before Socialist Action were prescribed. Now, if your response to that is to say, well, she probably asked for it, I do think you potentially lost your way a little bit, and I think it is an issue of respect. I think fair enough to say, look,
It's a stupid move, like strategically as well, just like alienating a huge subset of your voter base, and then also getting rid of a bunch of money, so much so that you now then undermine your overall political platform by having to fire and rehire your own fucking staffers as a Labour Party. It's embarrassing.
Few unjust suspensions. If what they're going to do is 28 billion a year in a Green New Deal, like, we can disagree about how plausible that is, but I think fine, it's fair enough to say he's done these bad things, but I want this money invested into the green economy. But to sort of turn around and say, if you've been expelled from the Labour Party in the past 2 years, you probably asked for it, I think is not really, you shouldn't really let it pass.
No, I'm not saying that of everybody, but there are some, and they are the loudest ones. Pamela Fitzpatrick, I take the point. There are others. Again, all the retrospective justice. What I would prefer is to bring in natural and indeed legal justice to the Labour Party. This is why the rule change they're bringing in is so pernicious. They're trying to get natural justice out of the Labour Party. I think we should all have a right to sue for our ability to be members. I think what the investigations into JVL have been a disaster as well. So I'm not trying to defend the purges. I'm against them. I'll fight against them on an individual basis. But I mean, pragmatically,
unless someone signed a petition against NATO, potentially.
No. What I'd say about that is that it's not signing a petition against NATO. It's signing a petition blaming NATO for a war on the eve of which a guy invades and starts genociding the Ukrainian people. If you think it's going to be fun going on the doorstep with an MP who's done that, then it'll be much worse than what it was in parts of the Midlands with Corbyn. It's just going to be awful. And I think that I would question the judgment of everybody who did it. I don't want to expel them. I want to hear from them what they've learned, actually. For me, the most important thing that happened is...
How have you learned about how wrong you are about the institution that's tried to undermine socialist advocacy for decades and decades? Have you learned from me, the correct man, Mr. Paul Mason, and my partner in crime, Keith Starmer? What have you learned? How are you going to better yourself moving forward as a member of the Labour Party who has had criticisms for NATO?
World is this horrific conflict, and getting it so badly wrong as a Labour MP. And by the way, we're not just dealing with left people, we're dealing with people on the Tory right, we're dealing with Labour MPs who turn out to have taken £500,000 from China.
But isn't that just quickly? It's a double standard, isn't it? I mean, loads of Tory, Labour MPs have gone to Saudi Arabia, paid for by the Saudi regime. They steal from the Saudi dictatorship as it carpet bombs Yemen. They support the Turkish regime. I mean, this is hypocrisy, though, isn't it? The standards.
Well, the one who supported the Turkish regime is now a Tory peer, isn't he? So it kind
Good point.
Yeah.
And you've got a Labour leader who says, "Oh, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Amnesty International all say Israel is apartheid." I disagree with them. Actually, it's a beacon of democracy. Now, I don't want to go on a doorstep with that guy, but can you make disciplinary decisions based on that? Well, but that was your argument for why someone signing a NATO letter you disagree with should be kicked out of the party. Where are you drawing the line? Why are you drawing the line exactly where the right-wing press do? Essentially, is what I'm asking.
Well, it's not just where the right-wing press would do. I think it's where any decent socialist would do.
But why would they draw
It-
it there and not apartheid Israel? That's what I'm saying. That's,
well,
What fucking planet does Paul live in where he thinks that solidarity for fucking NATO is more important for a socialist than opposing Israel as a and their apartheid project within the West Bank and Gaza, and opposing the carpet bombing of Yemen by the Saudi Arabian government and monarchy. What planet does this guy live on? This is unreal. I can't believe I had not seen this already.
because
Do you
the Labour
accept it?
Party,
Yeah.
because the Labour Party has a strong Zionist tradition, in fact, a mainstream Zionist tradition, and always has had. I'm not a Zionist. I don't.
But it's not
agree
about Zionism or not. It's about, do you recognise
Has the Labour Party had a strong Zionist tradition? I don't think it has.
the systematic violation of human rights, a la, you can be a Zionist and still think Israel is an apartheid
Yeah,
state.
there are Zionists who think that.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So why the difference? Because Ukraine is a war which has just started and is killing. I'm sorry. No,
The occupation, just because the occupation of Palestine, because it's happened for decades.
You're telling me that anybody who supports the state of Israel, is that what you're saying?
No,
that's not what I'm saying.
Should not
That's
be
what I'm
going on
saying
the
at all.
doorstep for Labour.
No.
Be very careful.
No,
Be
no.
very careful with that.
No one has said that remotely, Paul. So the issue
what
you're
are you
making
saying?
is, so you're saying that NATO potentially provoked Russia's invasion
No,
of
they didn't
Ukraine.
say potentially. They said NATO was
Okay.
responsible.
So let's start. So saying NATO provoked the war in Ukraine,
Yeah.
which I think there's some truth to. I mean, I probably wouldn't. I don't think that letter was particularly well drafted, but signing it is not a red line for me. And if it were, I think I'd find it very difficult to justify it being a red line for me, and it not be a red line for me that Keir Starmer not said, I believe there should be a state of Israel. He has said that these 3 of the leading human rights organizations in the world have come out, one of them Israeli, and have said that Israel is an apartheid state because it does these different things. He said, no, I don't agree with that. No, I think boycott, divest, and sanctions would be terrible. And that, while I accept you disagree with him there, you disagree with him on that, but you think that's perfectly reasonable and he should be leader of the Labour Party. A backbencher signed something about NATO that you disagree with, and you think that they should be expelled. And what I find interesting is that the only explanation I can find for drawing that line, but not that line, is that one of them is seen as acceptable by the political establishment, by Keir Starmer and the mainstream press.
No, you see, this is the Putin talking point, isn't it? Supporting Ukraine is racist.
What? How's Ukraine? How's that a Putin talking point? That the actions of the state of Israel in maintaining apartheid in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. How is that a Putin talking point? What? Isn't Netanyahu friends with Putin anyway? Doesn't make any fucking sense. That's that. It's a very clear, understandable left-wing viewpoint that the reason that there is Western supremacy, it's Western chauvinism from liberals in places in Europe and places in the United States, within a lot of NATO member states, is a Western chauvinist position to only show solidarity with the imperialist project that is being resisted by Ukraine, and the imperialist projects that are being resisted by Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, or is being faced by Palestine and Yemen, and had previously been faced by Iraq and Afghanistan, right? That's the point, is that the only reason why people are taking Ukraine seriously is because it's on their doorstep and because people are white. It's as simple as that. It's not a Putin talking point to say that, well, if you're going to condemn Russian imperialism, then you should also condemn Israeli imperialism and Saudi imperialism, right? Simple as that. It's very, very simple. And condemning the fact that we are selling weapons for the Saudi Arabian government to use on children, killing children in Yemen. It's as simple as that.
Everybody who supports Ukraine is really doing it because they don't support Yemen, because they don't support Palestine.
No. That's a level of causation that no one's ever fucking implied. But the reason why people are so explicitly only really care about Ukraine, and why not even consciously the way that they care about it, the reason why the Western media is explicitly focusing on the invasion of Ukraine rather than the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, is because the media perpetuates Western dominance, right? It peddles colonialist and imperialist narratives. It's very, very simple, Paul. For someone who's been in this business for however long, should not be this fucking stupid.
Paul,
This is not remotely what I've said in any way whatsoever.
Understand, Mike.
Paul,
That is the logic that behind the point you're making.
No,
If
not.
Paul,
it
can I
is-
just quickly sum up what Michael is saying here? He's saying if you're going to say that people who suggested NATO expansion played a role in the invasion of
I
Ukraine,
didn't suggest
they
we said it did.
right, okay, they shouldn't be in the Labour Party.
No, I'm
we're
just saying they should
people-
withdraw their
No,
names.
no, we're not talking about people supporting the state of Israel. There are lots. Jeremy Corbyn supports the two-state solution. You could lump him in that. Okay, we're not talking about people about supporting the right of the state of Israel to exist.
Yeah.
That's not the discussion we're having. It's
No.
about Israel being described as an apartheid state
Yeah,
by the
which is,
by-
I would describe it. I would describe
Right.
it as an
Okay.
apartheid.
But the point that Michael is making is why should it be possible for it to be perfectly permissible and acceptable and legitimate to deny the apartheid regime that does exist in Israel, according to Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem, and that's fine to be in the Labour Party. But if you say the wrong thing about Ukraine, you're out. Why? What's the difference?
There's a difference.
What's the
what is it?
difference?
Yeah, there's a difference. It's not saying the wrong thing about
Hey,
Ukraine.
North Countryman, how you
It's
doing?
No,
having
I think it's
a-
wrong, by the way. I don't. By the way, I think Russia is ruled by a despicable, kleptocratic, gangster, chauvinist regime, and decolonization, all the rhetoric that they have makes it very clear where they stand. But Israel is an apartheid state, and
Yes.
the leader of the Labour Party quoted a racist quote by Harold Wilson, I have to say, about how Palestine was a what did he say? It was like it was a desert where where nothing
They
was
made,
there.
they
and
made the desert bloom because
That's
Arabs
the one.
can't grow
That was
things.
racist, blatant racism. So why is it possible for Keir Starmer to deny the apartheid nature, which Amnesty and Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem say it is, and that's fine and acceptable, but you're beyond the pale on Ukraine for the reasons you've described? Why?
Well, okay, just let me explain it to you. It is entirely legitimate within the Labour Party for there to be a range of opinions on Israel, some which I would not share. Okay, which massively support Israel. You know, everything it does, criticize it in its own terms. Keir's position I wouldn't share, right the way through to an anti-Zionist position that I think or non-Zionist position that many of the left would put, and certainly all the Jewish Voice for Labour people who are still in the party.
Who they
would
want to purge?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay, but that's entirely. I want to fight for a party where it's legitimate remember what I said before. Its mainstream tradition of the Labour Party has been to support Israel. That's been its mainstream. If you want a party that has never supported it and does not, okay, that's
But there's a difference between supporting the existence of the state of Israel, which the vast, vast, vast majority of us do, support like the right for the state of Israel to exist, without them enforcing themselves in such a way that it creates an apartheid state, right? There to be a two-state solution or a one-state solution doesn't matter either way, right? As long as you are happy, like the vast majority of it, especially now, right? Because we're obviously we're all materialists on the left, right? So we all understand that the people of Israel are not the state of Israel. The people of Israel are the people of Israel, and they deserve to live in peace. They deserve to, live in sanctity without having to be scared about being victims of a rocket attack by Hamas. That's something that they shouldn't have to deal with. But we understand that the issue is the actions of the state of Israel and the government of Israel in maintaining the apartheid state with the Palestinian land that they control over even after their violation of the Oslo Accords, right? Is our understanding that when you materially analyze this situation, the people who live in the state of Israel, the Israeli citizens, are worse off because of those actions, because it creates conflict with Hamas. That's what everyone understands, because that's an issue with the way in which the state of Israel is conducting itself. Nothing to do with the Israeli people or the existence of the state of Israel as a country. Those are two different things, with criticizing the actions of the state of Israel and criticizing the idea that the state of Israel should exist in the first place. I disagree with the way that the state of Israel was created. Hey, thank you for the follow, Jonathan Ross. In that, it's very, very different. If you were just I'm very critical of the way in which the state of Israel was constructed in Palestine through, the power of the British and the Balfour Declaration, right? Like that's a colonialist project as far as I'm concerned, using the political power of the British Empire, the declining British Empire at the very least, to be able to use that power to, essentially kick Palestinians off their own land, right? You can be critical of that and then go like, well, that's happened already. Who cares? What matters now is the safety and sanctity of the people who live in Israel right now, and the safety and sanctity of the people who live in Palestine right now. That's what we care about. We care about that material understanding of that. rather than some kind of liberal idea of, you know, the right to statehood or whatever. But you're right, Ozan. We're watching a debate between Paul Mason, Owen Jones, and Michael Walker about Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, essentially.
It's going to be a different party.
Well,
With
with
Ukraine. So here's a contrast. Right, a range of opinions, an alliance of people around progressive goals can have different opinions on Israel. They cannot have different opinions on a genocidal war being perpetrated against a people who are right now in their thousands.
Just quickly, Paul, because I've got to go to a wedding and I'm going to get killed if I don't finish the stream as a result. But just quickly, do you think that all Labour figures who support arming Saudi Arabia, who are on record supporting arming Saudi Arabia as it carpet bombs Yemen, I'm including people who've supported selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, like Luke Akers, who sits on the National Executive Committee, and I also mean dozens, and we're talking dozens of Labour MPs who voted in 2016. They defied the whip when Jeremy Corbyn put down a motion, or they can't remember, the motion was on arming Saudi Arabia. Do you think they should be kicked out of the Labour Party? If you support What? Oh, okay. Yemen is the biggest humanitarian crisis on earth.
You do then, Owen. Are you saying Luke Akers should be kicked out of the Labour Party?
No, I'm not. You're the one who's saying people should be kicked out of the Labour Party.
I'm making a difference.
What's the difference? Yemen is the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. They are murdering children in buses with bombs from Britain.
Some understanding here. There are many differences that are containable within the Labour Party, but for me, the difference that says NATO is the aggressor in the Ukraine crisis is not containable because Russia is waging a genocidal war.
Right. Okay. Why?
So that's my politics. That's my opinion. I think that's
why is the life of a Yemen?
But why is it? Yeah, exactly. You know, Owen's about to make the point that I was about to make here, right? Yeah, I disagree with like the Mearsheimer hypothesis about NATO expansionism explicitly being the aggressor in the Ukraine crisis. That's obviously, I think that's completely incorrect. I think that NATO expansionism is part and parcel of the issue, but obviously that it'll mostly comes down to Russian economic imperialism, as far as I'm concerned. All that blood and soil posturing, I believe, was just that posturing, and then it's all about wanting to take control of the Donbass for its natural resources and to punish Ukraine for not joining the Eurasian Economic Area and wanting to join with Europe instead. I think it's purely economic. And polypride, from what I understand, again, I'm not a geopolitics expert, but the understanding that, you know, Ukraine joining NATO, or theoretically joining NATO, or NATO expanding further eastwards, contributes to the European hegemony that Putin is fearful of. Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. Paul can only think about this from an optical basis, rather than like, you know, where people stand ideologically.
Many so much lower than that of Ukraine.
Go again. So, Owen, this is the Putin talking point.
No, how dare you?
Supporting Ukraine is racist because
it's explicitly only caring about Ukraine, although not it's the way in which that it's purported by the media, right?
I support anyone who supports Ukraine is raising Ukraine above brown people. That's the Putin talking point. And
I support Ukraine's just war of liberation against Russian aggression. I support arming Ukraine against Russian aggression. Okay,
and the people who signed the Stop the War the coalition note or whatever it was, they also are almost certainly. I mean, certainly from what's been tweeted by people like Nadia, by people like Zara Sultana, etc., right? They also support Ukraine. The idea that people are saying that explicitly supporting Ukraine makes somebody racist is just nonsense. He's completely strawmanning everybody to try and save face in the face of the fact that his points just don't make any fucking sense.
On Yemen, where I've been to a Yemeni refugee camp, I've met Yemeni refugee children who drew pictures of their homes being bombed.
So you were asking me, what's the difference? There is no difference between the life of Ukrainian.
Right.
There's no difference.
So I'm asking you, why don't you support booting out Labour MPs who support arming, a dictatorship that beheads people like myself for being gay and Michael, that brutalises women, that exports international extremism and carpet bombs Yemen? Why are those people in the broad church of the Labour Party legitimate political actors, and the people you're describing in Ukraine aren't? Why?
It's sad that they exist. It's sad that they have that position. I don't know how many of them there actually are.
Dozens.
But, okay, dozens. Right, okay. It's sad, but it's not the same. Okay, it's not the same.
Why? Why?
Right, because, well, one, we, Labour, are a party whose commitment to NATO is unshakable. It's
non-negotiable. But whatever, but what's that got to do with this? What's it got to do with the value of life? It's a military organisation, the sanctity of NATO is more important than anything else.
No. The value of all lives are equal for me.
Good. I'm glad we've established it.
Okay, so
But Labour tradition values some lives more than other, and we have to be bound by Labour tradition.
no, that's nothing to do with Labour tradition. Labour's tradition on NATO is that we're part of NATO, and you cannot go on the doorstep with people who have wrongly and falsely.
I mean, even if you're part of NATO, you can still criticize certain aspects of NATO policy. There are plenty of people who are still in NATO to this day who support the existence of NATO, not even like myself, who disagrees with the existence of NATO. There's still people who are within NATO who support NATO, who disagree with the actions of NATO in Libya, in Afghanistan, and in Serbia, Montenegro, right? I'm sorry, but the idea that criticizing the actions of NATO is, in essence, is anti-NATO specifically. Obviously, I am anti-NATO, but that's he's including a further sphere outside of just like hard leftoids like myself, right? This is just straight up nonsense.
Echoed the propaganda talking points of a guy who has unleashed a genocidal war.
Right. We
You
all
can go
agree.
on the doorstep with people who have not just echoed the talking points of the leaders of Saudi Arabia, but have actively gone there and supported sending the precise wars which are killing people
That's
in
the
Yemen.
party you joined. That's the party you joined. I mean, sorry,
But there's only two parties in. There's one party that can get into government. If your argument is you have to accept that in this party, nothing is about righteousness, nothing is about justice. What it is about is these are the set parameters of the party. It's a party that supported colonialism quite recently. It's a party that went to the war in Iraq very recently. And so what we're going to do is when we're assessing who should be in it and who should not be in it, we're saying, is your relationship to foreign policy within the Labour tradition, and the Labour tradition being an incredibly imperialist and one which doesn't value lives equally. So I don't see how you can both say lives should be valued equally and we're going to let our sort of compassion towards people be sort of
not specifically George Gallo, but kind of tangentially related.
Limited within that which has been valued within the Labour tradition. It just doesn't make any moral sense.
So it makes a lot of moral sense to me, but we're going around in circles. To me, I don't want Stalinism to be part of the Labour tradition. That's my position. I don't want. See, there was a communist.
You want
party.
Saudi apologism to be acceptable in the Labour tradition?
Listen, there was a communist party in the 1930s. It signed a pact. It advocated a pact with Hitler.
Why is this relevant?
It's got nothing to do with the Labour tradition. It would be much better for me, from my point of view, if we had an internationalist left, an internationalist centre, but having a Stalinist left that continually pollutes the.
What's Stalinist about that? The only person engaged in Stalinism is fucking Keir Starmer, like prescribing whole groups and expelling people.
The image and perception of being left with its support for this guy in Moscow is
But
not
they're not even
functional.
supporting.
No one's supporting Putin. That's not what nobody's supporting Putin. That's just a straight up lie.
I mean,
No,
anyway, I need to
to go to a wedding.
Yeah, I think we should all. Yeah, but I mean, we're not going to agree on it. But
No, well, apparently, as I've
It's Paul Mason, Azir.
said, if you're an apologist for a head chopping regime which carpet bombs children, by the way, including children on a bus on the way back from a picnic,
I know how
in
bad
Yemen,
they are. I know how
incinerated.
bad they are.
But
I
they're
know how
fine in the Labour Party. The glorious
It's not,
George
it's not a
Church.
question of fine. It's a question of what is social democracy and what are its basic and moral and political tenets.
Arming
And-
child murderers, apparently. Anyway, look, we need to end there.
It's just his position just is not tenable. Yeah, I don't know why. That Paul seems to suddenly think that democratic centralism is apparently the whole tenet of Labour politics. Since when have the Labour Party ever been a believer in something like democratic centralism? This makes no fucking sense. It is an untenable position, and you're absolutely right, Dalek. Paul just literally spent the entire time just talking in circles because he doesn't understand what he's talking about, and it's just like the whole debate on both the local election results, Beergate, Keir Starmer's leadership, and also the issues with prescribing groups and Stop the War Coalition and the Ukraine crisis in Yemen. Right? It was just cope all the way down. Paul was just coping and coping and it was just nothing but cope. It's unfortunate because he's just set his ideological chips down, right? And with Keir Starmer, he's clearly committed fully. He's busy with the sunk cost fallacy. Right? There's just not much else you can really say after that because he just didn't make any valid points, which I think I counteracted pretty well at the time. But that's the end of that. One now then. Future YouTube viewers, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, current YouTube viewers, there are people watching on YouTube right now. Please like the stream. If you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe to the channel. And if you click the bell icon, it will allow you to. It will let you know when I am live. it will let you know, and you can come watch. I'll let you know when I upload segments like this one, which we put up as a segment online later on. And you can also go down the description box and follow me on Twitch as well if you're watching on YouTube. And then catch you later, future YouTube viewers. Thanks for tuning in. He cares more about power than whether or not we actually really count as people. Exactly. It's true. It's true. It's true. Like, and I can understand from a pragmatic perspective wanting to do things optically in such a way as to maximize your ability to be able to wield power. I get that. I understand that pragmatic perspective, right? I understand why people would want to take that position. But he's coping really hard for a guy who's so far to the right. It's not going to actually engender any proper systemic change. And as I was talking about with Karg yesterday, the fact that Starmer is explicitly taking like a monetarist understanding of the way in which the economy is managed, as opposed to a Keynesian one that essentially was drafted by Richard Murphy when he helped write the Labour Manifesto in 2017-2019, right? This is the political battleground that we have to fight in the UK at this point in time. Monetarism against Keynesianism. That's what we have to fight. And I say we, I really mean Keir, because he's not we. I'm not part of Keir Starmer's political project. If he genuinely believes in, a liberal, as Paul said, a liberal understanding and a monetarist understanding of public policy and the economic role of the government, he shouldn't be in the Labour Party. And also, all he's going to do is lend credence to the narratives that are being shown by the Conservatives. I did a video, it was the second video I ever put out on this channel, a year and a half ago now, about how at the start of the pandemic, everyone started criticising the Conservatives for raising the national debt. And I was like, don't do that. They want you to care about the national debt. The whole political project of neoliberalism for the past 40 years has been about, we have to bring the debt down because, because we can't add any more money to the economy, because under monetarist theory, all inflation is due to money supply, right? But any kind of public spending that increases money supply is something that we shouldn't be doing. And we should be cutting the deficit to make sure that we can use that to control inflation, right? Which obviously I disagree with as someone who is far more keen than that. Obviously I'm a Marxist, but I digress, right? I don't think those two positions are necessarily mutually exclusive. By explicitly using the increase in debt after the coronavirus pandemic that's been created by the Conservative government, next time it comes around to the election cycle and you've gone, you raised the debt load, so you can't be trusted with the economy, all they'll do is go back to you and say, your manifesto includes other government spending on infrastructure projects or welfare programs or some kind of new level of selective decommodification or nationalisation in your policy platform. Now you've shown that you agree with this by critiquing us previously about our increase in the national debt, so that we can now criticize you back under that same narrative that you've led credence to by making that criticism. So we can't do that. You can't do that if you're trying to fight from the left. And if we continue having these conversations, which is what's happening now, there's no proper, actual new policy platform that's being given by any party in the country apart from maybe the SNP and the Greens, about what can actually positively be done from an economic level to help with the cost of living crisis, and neither party wants to do it because they're both beholden to the monetarist ideological hegemony that gets pushed by the media and the leaders of all the parties in the country. So no one has a proper platform to deal with the cost of living crisis because they're all cucked by fucking right-wing economics, by neoliberal economics. When it comes around to the next election, the party gets stuff full of blown over to be 2 years down the line, and they won't be able to win because they would have spent their entire time just telling everybody in the country that yes, the economy is just a household budget. It is just money goes in, money goes out. We can't spend money because we need to balance the books, which is all of this nonsense. No, there is no magic money tree stuff. Which even the Tories know that that's not the case, because they've got money for Rwanda, they've got money for bombs, they've got money to be able to spend additional cash cracking down on and you're means testing people who try and apply for disability, right? So they understand the way in which the government spending can exist, because they know that there is, at least maybe not ideologically, But subconsciously, there is this understanding of the level of government spending that needs to be engaged in with which to be able to provide the citizens of the United Kingdom with a sustainable, a sustainable and reasonable standard of living. That's why we have the NHS. It's why we have the welfare policies that we do. It's why we're able to care for the disabled. And they can't renege on that, which is again from a Keynesian perspective. They can't renege on that. They can't do it. But they can still, when it comes down to it, when we talk about the level of government spending, suddenly they turn into monetarists. And any projects that would be proposed by a social democratic left-leaning platform, they can then attack, despite the fact that, their actual economic policy prescriptions or policy proposals that have been enacted, especially through the coronavirus pandemic, clearly shows that not to be the case. Because the inflation's only happened now. The money supply has been higher throughout the pandemic, but it's only now that there's supply chain issues because of the way in which the ports work. There's a really good segment. There's a really good segment on Novara, which had Grace Blakely on, who was great, and everyone should go talk about. Go follow on Twitter, Grace Blakely. Do that. Talking about how because of the way the seaports work and because of the way supply chains have been kind of stretched by the economic shutdown due to the pandemic, that's why we're seeing the inflation. It's cost push inflation. It's nothing to do with the money supply that's been created. This is the one. Let's find this one. About the political choice of inflation. So that's another Michael Walker clip we're going to have to deal with here, but we'll definitely watch it. It just blows these monetarist prescriptions out of the water. Especially considering what other countries do with their governmental budgets that don't experience the same inflation, or the more even further neoliberals who didn't enact policies who are still seeing the same inflationary issues that we're seeing, like places like Sweden or whatever. They didn't even have a proper fucking lockdown. Still seeing the inflationary pressures from the supply chain issues due to what's happening with shipping and what's happening with the energy crisis too. Anyway, let's watch this little clip. It's about 15 minutes long, and we can break down what's going on. I like the Novara studio they've got going on as well. I mean, Sinn Féin having a plurality in both Northern and the Republic of Ireland, it does show that there is at least a leftist sentiment, especially in places like Ireland, right? Obviously, they have a different political understanding, right? They are not the beneficiaries of imperialism in the way that the United Kingdom is, right? Or at least Britain, Great Britain specifically, not the United Kingdom, because it doesn't include Northern Ireland. So they don't have the same ability to cling to the imperial past and the gains of the imperial past that have been created through, capitalist platforms, right? So they're more likely to turn leftist than we are. But I think what's going to happen in the UK, I went into it yesterday, but there's complicated demographic shifts in the way that the populace is distributed throughout different seats, and there's also a demographic issue with how old people are and the gains that were made for a specific generation in the 80s, similar to Reagan, in the neoliberalization of the economy in the 80s was a big boost to the generation who were adults, who were middle-aged to young adults in that time period. They got a big boon from a lot of the sell-offs that happened within the neoliberalization of the economy under Thatcher and Reagan, and then they've kept those gains. But the reduction of the social spending that's happened because of that has then negatively impacted the future generations, and that's the generational divide that we've got in politics. So that voting cohort, that very large boomer voting cohort that benefited from the 80s, that's getting older and older, and that's staying very right-wing, just no matter their background, right? Whereas previously they would have voted far more left-wing beforehand because they were from working class backgrounds, but now they're older and they were the beneficiaries of this social sector sell-off under the neoliberal reforms under Thatcher. They've moved to the right. They've got houses now. They've got probably multiple houses, some of them, a lot of the time. So they stay right-wing. They're becoming right-wing, they're staying right-wing. Obviously, they're going to die off. And then our generation of millennials that are coming up underneath them, these are all people who haven't seen any of those gains. They don't own houses, they don't have jobs, they don't have pension, or they don't have vocations rather. They don't have pensions, they're working in the gig economy. They're not getting more right-wing with age. If anything, they're getting more left-wing with age. Millennials in both the US and the UK are further to the left than Zoomers are. Most polls show it. There's the Christian Niemetz article I talked about. There's also polling in the United States too. And they're not getting any less left-wing with age because those gains aren't coming. The wealth accrual which was, part of the social democratic consensus pre-Thatcher, that's not something that exists anymore. They're not going to be able to get more right with age. They'll realise what's been taken from them because of the sell-off in the 80s, and we'll see an electoral shift 10, 20, 25 years down the line as those people become the majority voting cohort rather than the boomers who benefited from Thatcherism. Oh, 100%, CO2. 100%. They sold off council houses to create Tory voters. Literally 100%. Absolutely guaranteed. Yeah, obviously, the left-wing boomers are the ones that die younger as well, right? Very fair. Yeah, you're absolutely 100%. Anyway, speaking of inflation, let's watch this Novara segment with Grace Blakely.
Earlier today, I spoke to economist and Tribune staff writer Grace Blakely.
So what Boris Johnson has done here is a classic political tactic of presenting a succession of things that are themselves political choices as inevitabilities. So his argument is basically, if we increase wages or benefits, or we kind of redistribute in order to deal with the inflationary crisis, then we'll get something called a wage price spiral, which is something that economists were very worried about during the 1970s, which is when you saw rising costs, you then saw unions demanding wage increases in line with inflation, and then bosses trying to deal with that by raising their prices, and then it becomes a kind of competitive spiral. What this whole idea of the wage price spiral actually highlights is that inflation is a political problem. It's a political question. It's about who's going to be made to pay for, in this case, rising energy costs and supply chain issues that are causing costs to rise across the board. And by saying we can't increase benefits, we can't raise wages because it will push inflation, what that is actually saying is it's going to be working people, it's going to be the poorest people in society who are going to pick up the costs of inflation. And the next step of that argument is to say, and then to deal with inflation, the central bank will have to raise interest rates, which is the only way really that economists have to deal with inflation. And that will then cause people's debt servicing costs to increase. Now, again, that is not an inevitability. There are lots of ways of dealing with inflation, and particularly when inflation is coming from what economists refer to as the supply side. So to do with kind of, issues with supply chains, to do with exogenous shocks, rather than things to do with demand, then it doesn't really make sense to increase interest rates, because the transmission mechanism as to how interest rates are linked with inflation.
Aggregate demand hasn't risen because wages haven't gone up. Wages have been lagging behind productivity for decades, like not just in the UK, but especially in the US. One of the factors that would push a wage price spiral is wages rising above productivity, which they're not doing. It's nowhere near. And it's not raising aggregate demand. So it's very, very clear this is cost push inflation. It's to do with the supply chain issues, nothing to do with either the money supply nor a forthcoming wage price spiral.
Inflation is supposedly that when people borrow lots of money, when businesses borrow lots of money for investment, they create new jobs. When they create new jobs, they hire more people. When they hire more people, there is a tighter labour market, which means higher wages. And then you've got more spending in all these different areas of the economy, which causes it to overheat. That is emphatically not the problem that we have today. So raising interest rates to make borrowing more expensive and prevent businesses from investing and preventing them from hiring more workers isn't going to do anything to tackle that problem of energy costs. It's just, again, going to force borrowers and workers to pick up the tab. So this whole thing is a very, very political question. And Boris Johnson has cleverly, as these politicians, particularly neoliberal politicians, are wont to do, very cleverly taken this political question and disguised it in kind of complex economic terminology to make it seem as though it's just a kind of technocratic issue and it's all about just solving this narrow economic problem of how we reduce inflation. Whereas actually what we're dealing with here is a political question: who's going to pay for inflation?
Can we talk about specifically what's causing the inflation we're currently seeing and how that affects how we should respond to it? So on the one side, you've got supply side inflation. So that's people talking about the war in Ukraine or shortages in factories in China or whatever. The other side is demand side. So that could be that people are demanding too many goods, incomes are too high. And especially here, you might talk about the government printing a lot of money during the coronavirus pandemic. Which one of these are we looking at?
If we're having kind of demand-driven inflation, it would be an imbalance between levels of demand in the economy and the amount of stuff that we have and are able to produce. So let's say, everyone's earning loads of money, businesses are doing loads of investment, and it's just like impossible to get access to the stuff that you need to, let's say produce your goods and services, or, the consumer goods that you need. And so in that very competitive marketplace where lots of people are saying, I want this, I want this, I want this, prices go up because there's lots of bidders basically for those goods. There are some areas of the economy where this is true. So say like construction, for example, because there's still kind of a relatively high amount of demand for construction materials and things. There's lots of bidders, and there are also supply constraints, but that's kind of limited because obviously what we are going through right now is a very, very deep economic crisis. There aren't lots of people scrambling to buy loads of things. There aren't lots of businesses scrambling to undertake loads of investment, unless you look at the very, very top end of the economy where there are people. There's currently like a shortage of private jet hangars because so many people have private jets. So there are areas where that is true, certainly, and again that has to do with QE and the impact on wealth inequality. But actually what we're really looking at, and this is what economists mean when they say supply side, are issues around supply. Now, there are two factors that are primarily affecting this, and you will have heard these things said, but I'll just kind of explain.
At the end of the day, one of the primary drivers of a potential wage price spiral, if that were to happen, which probably wouldn't in this case because it's not a demand issue, it's a supply side issue. But even if it was, the main driver of a wage price spiral is the economic greed of business owners. It is their, or not even their economic greed, because it's built into the system. It's their fiduciary responsibility to continue to drive shareholder profits. So wage growth that eats into those profits causes higher prices because of that, the explicit need of those businesses to have to drive shareholder prices. Otherwise, they wouldn't be fulfilling their fiduciary responsibility. Whereas if they're all worker co-ops, if they're all LLCs, right? If they're all LLCs who are worker-owned and worker-managed, where profits only ever get reinvested or get shared amongst the working members of the economy, that need, that explicit desire to only see those profits increase to be able to benefit shareholder dividends doesn't exist in the same way, right?
What they mean. So first, obviously, it's energy prices, and secondly, there are supply chain issues. Now, with energy prices, you'll remember during the pandemic, there was a time at which oil prices hit zero. Now, that was partly because of the shutdown of the economy itself. So, people obviously weren't demanding as much oil. It wasn't being used in the production processes. Trade was shut down. And it also had to do with some kind of complications around the way that futures contracts were arranged. I won't go into that, it's very boring. But, oil prices actually hit zero because it wasn't being used. So obviously, if we're thinking about supply and demand, the people who supply the oil then look at that and think, well, why would it, profit us to supply oil when prices are this low? We're going to hold back. And there was this narrative that this was going to kind of push the renewables revolution because existing fossil fuel suppliers would see that it's not profitable to produce fossil fuels anymore and they would all move into renewables. Of course, that turned out to be wildly over-optimistic, not least because they had a lot of investment in existing projects already that they need to complete. But obviously, when the economy reopened and demand for fossil fuels then skyrocketed, you had these problems around constraints in supply, which meant that prices then skyrocketed and it went the opposite direction. Then you had these geopolitical tensions and all these issues around, Russia invading Ukraine, and that made the whole situation much worse, and much worse, obviously, in particular markets as well. So this problem with natural gas is obviously a much bigger supply issue in Europe than it is in other parts of the world. So there's the energy issue on the one hand. Then there's also these issues around supply chains. Now, this is interesting and complicated. I find this super interesting as an economics nerd. If you just take the example of, say, global shipping, right? Shipping is this highly interconnected and very fragile system where over the years you had containerization leading to the creation of just these massive, huge container ships that can carry astonishing amounts of goods. And they're very, they can only go into certain ports. They take a very long time to load and unload. And the whole system has to be very, very finely tuned so that, one boat comes in, it's unloaded, it leaves, another boat comes in immediately afterwards. And that all collapsed during the pandemic. So the finely tuned network that governed global shipping broke down. There were loads of ships that were stuck at sea for ages. This was disastrous for the crews that were on there who were stuck at sea for ages. It also meant that just a load of goods couldn't be unloaded, couldn't be reloaded, ports were closed, there weren't the workers available, etc. Then when the economy reopened, suddenly there was all this demand, and there was a huge backlog because of the ships that had been stuck at sea. So these huge queues outside some of the major ports. And this basically continued in one form or another for years. It's still continuing to this day, actually, particularly around China, where it's still very difficult at the moment to load and unload because of the lockdowns in Shanghai. That also, those kind of issues around supply did also interact with an issue around demand, which was that demand for physical goods increased during the pandemic because demand for services had fallen. So there was more basically physical trade taking place, even as the infrastructure was crumbling. So what happened? And this is the key question again. This all sounds very technical, but this is why it's political. The reason that had a massive impact on inflation and is still having a big impact on inflation is because the global shipping companies, there are a few massive global shipping companies that control the vast majority of shipping trade. They're basically an oligopoly and they cooperate and collude with one another. There's no antitrust regulation that's imposed over these ships. They just sent prices through the roof. So shipping costs just utterly exploded during the pandemic in a way that we hadn't really ever seen. And that impacts the price of pretty much every good that has to be imported. And in an import-dependent economy like ours, like the US, that's going to have a bigger impact on inflation.
How should the left respond?
Well, that's a lot of stuff. But she's absolutely correct there, and she's incredibly based, and you should go follow her. And it reminds me, it's sort of similar to it, the way in which it reminds me of the issue regarding what was going to happen to aerospace permissions in a no deal Brexit situation where these things weren't ever. There's a period where these weren't finalised yet, and all of the aerospace permits were all governed by EU regulations and European understanding and the EU understanding of who was permitted to go into certain aerospace and the rights of them with which to do so. And so, without that being negotiated through a Brexit deal, that would essentially halt all, if in a case of no deal Brexit, would halt all air travel in and out of the UK. Now, planes don't just go flying from A to B. They have year-round planned future flights, right? Every single day. So on the March the 3rd, or May the 9th, whatever it is for today. So today they are currently planning flights for the 9th of May next year. So if that all gets planned way in advance, right? So if a plane can't take off to go, or you can't fly from Senegal to London, whatever, and then that same plane had then previously been planned to fly from London to Copenhagen, right? And then that Copenhagen flight was then flying to, Almaty or whatever. that's a whole chain that's been broken up by the issue of no deal Brexit. And that's similar to looks like similar to what's going to happen with the shipping issues here, where all of these intricate plans have just been kind of destroyed by the shutdown of the economy due to Brexit, due to the pandemic rather. Which has made it which has just increased like the natural cost of these things overall because it's disrupted the way in which that supply chain, which I find super interesting. It also similarly reminds me of with the kind of cartelization of what's happened with these major shipping companies about what's happened to the price of the drugs that the NHS has to buy from the common European market, right? So things like paracetamol, generic drugs that you just need to get access to. A cartel has been created from pharmaceutical manufacturers in the EU, which is mostly where we buy from. I think Belgium and Denmark are the main kind of exporters of these pharmaceuticals, then come into the UK. They've created a cartel and have all engaged in price fixing to raise their prices. I think it was the prices had risen like 72% in 3 years, or something crazy like that, which has massively increased the amount of money the NHS has to pay for them. Even because usually when you have a market of sellers and one buyer, being a monopsony buyer of this product meant that you got to be able to create a bidding war between these three people to get your business. But now they've created a cartel. That's essentially fixed the price for the monopsony buyer. Which is what's happened with the shipping cartel to increase costs massively because of what's happened during the pandemic. Obviously, there's an easy solution for the NHS issue, and that's just build a drug factory, manufacture drugs at cost in the UK with a publicly owned pharmaceutical company. But of course, that's not what neoliberalism says we should do, so we don't do it.
On to inflation. I mean, it's been a question that we haven't had to worry about for a while because there's been decades of very low inflation. It used to be a very tense question for the left to answer. That was one of the reasons why the Keynesian consensus broke down at the end of the 1970s. How should we be responding to this? How do we reassure people that we've got an answer to inflation, and what is that answer?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the same as we should be using the same framework to respond to this question as any other question. Not starting with this technical point around, where should we be raising interest rates, where should we be, constraining wages, all these different sorts of things, but actually starting with the question of who is going to pay for this inflationary crisis. And that is really how we need to be framing all of these issues, because whilst politicians on the right are very, very keen to say we need to avoid a wage price spiral, so let's raise interest rates, which is going to help creditors and potentially increase unemployment and punish workers. They're not going to say all the links in that chain. They're just going to say wage price spiral, that's bad economics, so we raise interest rates. We need to expose the links in that chain, so basically tell people that what they're saying is working people, you're going to be the ones who are going to have to pay for this inflationary crisis, which people already know because they're feeling it in their pockets, and then say this doesn't have to be this way, which it doesn't. Because one thing that we're not talking about, politicians are very, very happy to talk about the fact that, wages are increasing by this amount each year. By the way, wages aren't increasing as fast as inflation by any stretch of the imagination, which means most people are experiencing currently a real terms pay cut. Bear in mind that before that, we'd had a decade of wage stagnation, which meant that in the UK, between 2008 and 2018, the average worker didn't see their pay increase at all. In the US, average pay in purchasing power parity terms was effectively the same in 1979 as it was in 2018. So the idea that workers are doing really well out of this crisis.
There's an issue with the debtors crisis in purchasing power of the proletariat, right? It's not just businesses who are taking out loans that are affected by the interest rate increase in the UK, with which to be able to create additional money to put into wages to increase aggregate demand. Aggregate demand had previously been increased due to the amount of debt that people had to take out on a personal level to top up the fact that their wages weren't increasing with productivity and with inflation, right? So to be able to survive, people were having to take out additional credit, which they're now paying back now, which then actually overall decreased aggregate demand moving forward, which even further shows that it's a supply side cost push issue rather than anything to do with either the money supply or nor aggregate demand.
Crisis because they have loads of bargaining power and are able to demand wage increases in line with inflation. It's just living in a fantasy land. The people who, the part of the conversation that we're not having is the extent to which profits are driving inflation. Because of course it's not just wages that can be leading to an increase in demand and pushing up costs. It's also profits. And corporate profits have skyrocketed over the last 40 years, really, and especially actually over the last 2 years. We've had these massive windfall profits that have come from big corporations, and many of which have been distributed to shareholders, have exacerbated wealth inequality. And we're not talking at all about the extent to which that is driving inflation, particularly in house prices, because a lot of that money is being driven back into property markets.
Is there an even simpler way of putting this and saying it's about profits being too big and just saying it's about the consumption?
It's about Minecrafting the billionaires in Roblox, theoretically and satirically.
Habits of the rich. So the argument I think Boris Johnson is putting forward is saying if you give poorer people more money, they'll spend more money and that will drive demand. Well, isn't the response to that just say, what about the rich people spending more money? What about them driving demand? Let's tax their wealth. And if we tax their wealth, we can take some demand out of the system, but from the people who can actually afford to have that demand taken, who can afford to have that consumption power taken from them. Would that be a reasonable response?
Yeah, totally. And when you frame that as well, it's not just in terms of wealthy people, but also big corporations, then the argument is even more compelling. What they will say is that the effect of that isn't going to be big enough to have a significant enough impact as opposed to kind of constraining wages across the income spectrum. And there is a point there because it's not just the very, very wealthiest. That would, have to, that we're looking at in terms of like the distribution of the pain here. If we're really thinking about like how we balance the cost of inflation, we have to bear in mind the long-held neoliberal fear that inflation actually erodes asset values. So if we are going to, let's say, provide subsidies for working class households to be able to maintain a basic level of living standards to get through this crisis, as well as taxing the rich, and kind of trying to hold salaries at the top end of the income spectrum relatively constant, then what you will see is that those who have a greater amount of wealth held in assets, or rely more on assets for their income, say, will be harmed more than those who rely on incomes that are being uprated with inflation. So that is about house prices as well, which is why it's a really hot political topic. But obviously, saying that like
kill the housing market. I am now a homeowner. I do not care. Crash the housing market. Couldn't give a shit.
House prices need to come down relative to incomes is not something that I think is going to be controversial for the vast majority of people in this country. It's just a question of, again, how it's framed, and are we able to say, and really actually push back against this neoliberal argument that the only thing that you should be worrying about is the value of your house and the value of your pension, and actually saying, well, no, we need to be thinking about increasing people's incomes, we need to be thinking about affordability, and we need to be thinking about actually the structure of the economy long term and how we're going to push for the green transition that's going to create a livable planet for your children. There will, of course, be reaction that will be like, no, the only thing I care about is the value of my home. But I think it's questionable how politically relevant that will be, or that argument will be going forward as this crisis gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And even people who do have some housing wealth start to see their incomes eroded to such an extent that they are actually struggling as well.
The cost of living crisis is the central issue facing most Britons right now. Energy bills are rocketing, food prices are rising, and wages and benefits are not catching up. And it's in this context that top...
Yeah, that was the kind of point that I wanted to make from that. But she's absolutely right. It's about who is going to have to pay for what's happening with inflation. And it is a function of capitalism, because of what I said before about the necessity for shareholder dividends to be able... the necessity for shareholder dividends to be created by capital, because of fiduciary responsibility that drives the inequality that leads to the crisis we're seeing at the moment. We can keep aggregate demand the same by moving the money, by taxing wealth to be able to put into social policies to be able to stop inflation. Right? It's a very, very simple way of solving this issue. And then you wouldn't need that. There wouldn't be the theoretical risk of a wage price spiral. Exactly same. It's not the only reason why I wanted to own a house was so I didn't have to pay rent anymore. That's what I want. That's what I care about. Once you're on the housing ladder, you've then got an asset. I don't care how much that asset's worth eventually, because this 200, 300, 400, 500 pounds or whatever you'd end up spending each month on rent, that's now money that you have putting into an asset. Whether I spend £100,000 or £200,000 or £300,000 at the end of the day on that asset, whether it's worth half of that or a quarter of that or double that, it doesn't matter to me, as long as I don't end up with nothing afterwards, which is what happens when you rent. It's very, very simple. I could not give a shit whether the housing market crashed or whether it didn't. Do not care, because anything is better than renting. Economically speaking. I just don't care. Just crash it. Fuck it. I don't give a shit. The house won't disappear. It's not gonna, unless it catches fire. That's also reasonable, Charlie, yeah. But I mean, it's the consequence at the end of the day, right? It's that if you're renting, you literally work hours for nothing regardless. You're working hours to buy somebody else a house. Whereas even if you buy a house, even if there's like, I think even if let's say for example, a £300,000 house or whatever that you take out a mortgage on and then you pay £300,000 for, even if that value goes down to zero, obviously it wouldn't, because it's a commodity and they can't be like zero value, something that's as necessary as a house, right? Even if that commodity drops to zero, at the end of your repayments, you would still have a house. Whereas if you were renting that whole time and you were making payments that were equal to the mortgage up to the sum of £300,000 at the end of your life as a renter, you still have no fucking house, right? Obviously, negative equity is only really an issue if you have to move, right? Which is fair. I get that issue. Which is why we shouldn't have a housing market that's predicated on everybody making sure that their house price continually increases forever. Rather than having, a very large social housing sector, meaning that people always have access to some kind of level of shelter, regardless of their economic situation, for the entirety of their lives, right? And they wouldn't have to make sure that they were investing to make sure they had somewhere to live when they retired. Or at the moment, what it's looking like, to have somewhere that have a house that they can sell when they retire to pay for the cost of care. And because their defined contribution pension isn't enough to actually maintain their needs to be able to see them cared for when they're old. So that's another. I've said that before. There's another crisis down the road, and it's the care crisis that's coming. Boomers are going to be fine because they've all got defined benefit pensions. They've all got their house and then also an inherited house as well. I mean, obviously they don't all do, but there's far more asset wealth that they can draw to with the houses that they own, and then things that they can, and then also like additional assets that they can inherit from their, they're not well off, but maybe more well off than millennials' parents, right? They can afford to pay for their care. We're not going to be able to do that. What the fuck's going to happen when we retire? It's going to be an absolute clusterfuck, and that's why it was so important for Jeremy Corbyn to win, because he was going to create a national care service. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to the eventual care crisis that's however many decades down the road. Yeah, that's true, Theo. That's very true too, actually. You are right. Feel sorry for everybody with a tracker mortgage right now. And also those with endowment mortgages too. World's depressing right now, isn't it? At least there is some social housing, unlike in the United States. I couldn't get my picture to turn the right way up when I was putting the stream up, like the actual thumbnail or whatever, but who cares at this point? What's going on in the Twitterverse? Time are we on? Oh, fucking hell, it's 10 o'clock. Jesus, it's coming up late, and I have work at 7 in the morning tomorrow, so I probably should raid out and end the stream there. I only managed to get one segment out there. I guess I'll do my hot take about my trad wife hot take. I'll leave for tomorrow's stream. I have I have the day. Actually, I have the day off tomorrow. What am I talking about? I am still tired. This probably will still raid out. But tomorrow I will do it. I will be talking about the trad wife question and the reserve and the latent reserve army of Labour, which will be an interesting conversation to try and convince millennials. Apparently, millennials want trad wives now. And convince them that if you're complaining about not getting a trad wife, you shouldn't blame feminism. You should blame capitalism. Quite interesting. But I digress. Like, where is my Raiderino going? Let's have a look. Who is online? Also, if you are watching and you're enjoying what you see, and you're watching on YouTube, please drop a subscription and a like on the stream. If you're watching on Twitch, either please drop a follow, and if you're feeling incredibly generous, my donate button doesn't work, it's been banned from PayPal. You can subscribe both with money or by linking your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, and then you can subscribe for free 1 month to a different channel each month. Sorry, if you would like to, that'd be very, very, very appreciated. And you transferring some wealth from Jeff Bezos to me at the end of the day. Otherwise, you're just gonna that £2.50 is just gonna go to him rather than me. And if you can't afford a subscription, feel free to drop. I'll be very appreciative if anybody dropped any spare bits, but it's not necessary. I do this for fun, so it's not an issue either way, whether you want to or not. Who is alive? Need to read into. Let's go. James, who is from the internet. But yeah, thank you very much for joining the stream today. It was a fun one. I had a good time chill out with you guys. I seem to be getting on average at least 10 viewers, like average viewers per stream, which is great, which is good, which is much better than usually. In fine form, his tagline is "the rent is too damned high," which follows on much what we're talking about the housing